Are you gonna? We are live. Welcome to Literary Roadhouse. One short story, once a week. I'm Maya.
I'm Gerald.
I'm Rami.
And I'm Anais.
And this week we read Who Will Greet You at Home by Lesley Nneka Arimah. This story first appeared in The New Yorker and was a runner-up for the 2017 Caine Prize for African Writing. You can find more information about the Caine Prize at caineprize.com. Here's our summary. If you haven't read the story and you want to, definitely turn this off, go read it, and come back to our show. In a world where women create children of the materials of their choice to be blessed into life by their mothers, Ogechi is a foolish, hopeful Nigerian woman who weaves beautiful, delicate children, much too soft for the world of a lower-class, hardworking mother. Because her own mother disapproved of her soft creation, she instead lives in a home owned by her boss, who also blesses the lives of children for motherless girls. The woman charges Ogechi even when her creations are destroyed, and since Ogechi's poor, she removes part of her humanity instead. When Ogechi's newest creation, a child made of yarn, unravels before the required year, Mama takes a bit of her joy. In a fit of jealousy after seeing a rich woman with a porcelain doll, Ogechi makes a child out of piles of hair from the hair shop's floor. Hair babies are forbidden, and especially children made of the hair of many people. After feeding the child hair and nursing her from her nape, the child ate a co-worker whole, then later attacks Ogechi's boss. One night, Ogechi wakes to the child standing over her, and the child attacks. Ogechi struggles and fights until she finally sets the child on fire. In sadness, she takes the ash of the child and makes a new child of clay, just like her, but blesses it in sorrow to a life without hope or foolish joy. So, what were your guys' initial thoughts about this story? Wow, silence.
Weird. Is this going to split by genders? Because Gerald and Rami looked like they didn't like it, and I loved it.
Me too.
I liked it not at all.
Wow.
This is fascinating.
Goodness.
That's actually surprising.
I totally thought this was going to be like a Gerald, like, oh my God, this was amazing. Wow, you didn't like it. How about Rami?
No.
What?
Have we ever had a story that divided this sharply along gender lines?
You know what? This story doesn't have a single man in it. It's a women-only story, so...
Oh, come on. That's
I'm
not
kidding.
serious. Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Oh,
Yeah, this story passes the Bechdel test.
And then some. Men don't even exist in this universe.
Who needs men? We've got clay.
Good luck to you. Carry on.
Anais, what did you think of the story now that we've spoiled it a little bit?
Oh, I loved it. I loved the story. I thought it was just great. Like, as I'm reading the story, I'm like telling the person next to me, like, oh, this just happened. They don't care. They're not reading the story. And I'm like updating them. And then at the end of it, I'm like telling them what happened. I thought it was fantastic. It had a little bit of horror, and it was just, it had all these great comments on like motherhood and what? Okay. All right.
I felt for you, Anais. I was like bouncing in my seat going, oh my God, I picked an awesome story. I totally did it. I picked an awesome story. I honestly think this is the best short story I've read in the last year. Like in the last 12 months, easy. This is the best short story I've read. Like you said, it touches on a lot of things. It touches on class. It touches on mother expectations. It also, like this idea of moving beyond your place in the world and then getting knocked down, which I've seen done in a lot of Japanese literature. You know, there's the idea of, you know, you don't want to be the one nail that's standing up. And I get a lot of that in this story. And it's like you said, it touches on horror. It's very literary. It's got magical realism, which I think may be why we lost Gerald, because it has so many layers. Like, I'm like, how did we lose Gerald on this? But the magical realism really required a serious suspension of belief in this story. And it didn't give you all the rules up front. So I think maybe that might have been an issue. Gerald, did this story ever have you, or were you just like, I hate it from like the get?
I didn't hate it from the start. I thought, this is strange when I started reading it, and I read the first bit a couple of times to make sure I understood the context of what it was and what was happening, and then I read it, and I read it again, and I just thought, You see, I get the commentary on motherhood. I get the commentary on class and status and all that sort of stuff. But for me, it lacks a grounding in any sense of reality I can recognize to ground me in the story.
That's fascinating, because not only, I mean, this is something that I didn't really think about until just now when you said that, Gerald, because not only is the story not grounded in reality, because it is very much a magical realism story that doesn't display its rules up front, but also it's not grounded in Western thought. This story at its core is an African story. So you're talking about transcultural as far as reading a story that is from a different culture, but also adding magical realism to that, which I could see as making it very difficult to see yourself in. Me, as a woman who's had children, it perhaps was maybe easier for me to make that leap.
Yeah, I think because there's nothing I can get into in the story. As I say, I understand what it's doing, and I understand, you know, the depths to it, but the whole context for it is just too removed from me and my life and my experience for me to just, you know, if there was some sort of little thing, I don't know, maybe something about men and why girls did this or something, but it just beyond what I could cope with.
Yeah, whereas for me, the thing that allowed me to get into the story was probably the mother-daughter conflict, because that is very universal between mothers and daughters. It's very different than father-son conflict or mother-son conflict. It's a very specific conflict rooted in a whole lot of crap. And when I saw that and it rang so true, it made it easy for me to make that leap. How about you, Rami? Did the story ever have you, or did it lose you from step one?
I think Gerald spoke very elegantly as usual, because my reaction was just, I'm tired of not understanding the story. I'm tired.
Yeah.
Call me a simpleton, whatever. I'm done with the layers. Look, I didn't feel like going on this archaeological excavation that the author wanted me to do to enter this world. Don't get me wrong, I liked the movie National Treasure, but I'm not Nicolas Cage here, where I can do this every week.
Rami, is this why you took a nap?
Is this your resignation speech?
Did
this story make us lose Rami?
And
there's no way, because I'm giving this a 6, and if Rami quits over a 6,
look, you're free to do what you want, and I do recognize, I like to take my own like state of being into account when I'm reading the story, and so I will take into account the fact that I'm feeling a bit sick, so I'm gonna give that a little buffer to raise it in my rating, but it just wasn't there. Like I highlighted the best part of the story to me. I forget what page it's on, but there's a little cartoon where the police break a door into a room full of cows and they shout, "Police, nobody move." That was funny.
Talking about a New Yorker cartoon.
Okay, Rami, Annie's. In a few years, when we go back and we have to pull the highlights of Literary Roadhouse's Rami's speeches, this one is right up there with Delira. Like, seriously, it's like Delira, and then this one.
Oh my goodness.
Epic. That was so epic.
This story has made Rami grumpy.
Yeah, for a minute there, I thought Rami was resigning. I thought that was like his resignation speech. I was like, oh shit, we got to find a new co-host.
Do it publicly? Like who was it?
I don't know. Maybe the story pissed you off to that level. I don't know.
On live TV.
It's been known to happen. who was it, that news anchor like walked off in the middle of the news?
Yeah.
I thought this was like the Rami equivalent. Oh man, that was awesome.
Take off my headset.
Thank God I have some coffee because I've got tears and I need to drink something. Okay.
We'll read a good story next week.
Let's start at the top level because it does seem like the men had issues with this story. And we've mentioned that it had many layers. So I want to ask each of you, what did you think this story was about? Like one sentence, what is the story about?
Motherhood.
Don't ask me.
I think motherhood's too broad. I think it's a little bit like, I didn't think it was that deep, this one, because she says over and over the sacrifices a mother is expected to make for her children. And it's like physical, like self-harm. Because when you make it a doll and not an actual human baby, you can really like bring that sharply into focus. The way that she's expected to give her humanity, to give up aspects of herself in order to have this baby. And that wasn't very deep. That wasn't like under layers. There's no archaeological excavation there. So for me, that's the part that stood out the most.
Yeah, that was definitely a really strong theme, especially with the way the baby kind of consumes her, literally. And then the mama, her boss, what does she do whenever she has a child that doesn't succeed? She takes something physically, emotionally from her. I think that's definitely right up there. For me, this story is about that motherhood struggle of wanting, of your unacceptance of yourself being projected out onto your children. You don't want your child to be like you. You want your child to be better than you. And I think that is a really insidious problem. I think it's the base of most mother-daughter conflict, to be honest. And I thought that was shown beautifully in this story.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say the only conflict I have with my mom is her expectations that I be like her and better. Same path and one step ahead. And it's like, that's not what I want to do. Like, that's the only time.
Yeah.
And you said something, you know, the way that after every single baby doll, literal doll, fails, Mama Said, she takes from her humanity. And I thought it was beautiful how it takes from you both in the creation and in the loss. So both in the trying to have this baby, in the way that that she is taxed just for forgetting the traditional song, and then in the way that when you lose it, she's being taxed again. And I don't know, like there's echoes there of like a miscarriage, and in the beginning, I even thought a little bit of like IVF and everything that has to go into that in order to have a baby, and the way that you will put up with a lot of indignities just even in a pregnancy and in order to have that kid. Yeah. And if you lose it, you lose part of your humanity. And still she's trying and trying and trying. And at no point does she question, does she even want this?
Yeah, I found it really interesting that the author actually doesn't have children, because that feeling of losing your humanity and having a child is so beautifully written here. Like, I remember that feeling being in the doctor and ceasing to be a woman. And I'm now just a baby that's going to come out and a vagina that every single person in the building can just walk into the room and stare at. And that is a very like mortifying feeling. And she gets that. She gets it without it being about that. Like
and
that.
It's both ends. Like maybe she doesn't. It's both ends. It's the way that you're reduced to being nothing but this vessel that is supposed to sacrifice everything to have a kid. And then on the other side, when you lose it, you're still losing a part of your humanity. And there's criticisms in the way that you failed and that you were bad. So I wonder if maybe the author has had the other side of it, the loss. Maybe she doesn't. I mean, I'm speculating here, but like it could come from both sides, that understanding.
Yeah, I think it definitely can. I also think something else that we haven't touched on is, why is she having this kid? Like she's making this child, but I felt throughout the story that she was trying to have children because she was expected to have children, but she didn't want to have a child like her. She wanted to have a child that was special and different. Like that idea, where is that line? If I'm going to have to give up all of myself, essentially. And I'm paraphrasing because I can't pull that up on my computer without ticking off our resident editor, Gerald. But you know, if I'm going to give up everything, the child has to be perfect. You know, and that speaks to not only wanting something better than you, but it also speaks to, ew, do you even want to have a kid in the first place?
But she never questions that.
Yeah, it's never questioned. And I think for a lot of women, they have children without questioning whether they want children. Like, I think it's becoming easier for women to say they want to be child-free. But I remember just, 5-10 years ago, one of my friends is child-free, and when she went to the doctor to get her tubes tied, the doctor was refusing her because you're too young to really know. You'll change your mind later, and this idea that, well, you're female, so of course you're going to want to have children. It's a really heavy expectation put on women. And then if you choose to be child-free and you say you're child-free, there's a lot of judgment that comes in with that. So I felt like this story kind of touches on a lot of different themes.
And in this world where everyone is women, she's just carrying a bundle and people want to know what she's carrying. People feel entitled to see this baby. Someone has 2 raffia woven dolls in the back of the bus and everyone's like, let's do the traditional song. Like, the whole culture is wrapped up around this baby making, which isn't that far in a way when you're looking at like women in the age group where that's what's happening. Everything becomes about that. Everything is the baby making, right?
Yeah. So my question now, Gerald has said that if there was something he could have grasped onto, if there was a male in the story per se,
he
like,
didn't.
For me, having a man in the story would have taken away from the story because it would have made the way that children were made less dramatic, and she would have had another voice in the process. But I wonder how it would have changed the story. I feel like it almost would have made it more traditional.
Yeah, I'm not saying that the story should have had male characters, or that I was looking for male characters. That was just something plucked out of the air. The story does fine on its own, being all female, and I understand that there's probably a reason for that. But my problem is that it's an alien world, it's an alien process, and
there's nothing in it that's not alien. It's an alien culture to you.
Yeah, it's like it's a bit like a story that describes the life of some Martians on a distant planet or something. Not that women are Martians, but anyway, get the feel. But
I don't know. I know some men that might argue with you on that point.
Yeah, so why would I be interested unless it has some reference to me and my life? And I think
you have a wife, you have daughters.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you be interested in the story just because of how it enlightens, understanding them more fully?
No, I understand them. They don't make babies out of bits of hair and stuff. So
no, but you've seen mother-daughter conflict. You've seen the yearning for a child. You've seen what it's like when the ability to have children is no longer present. Like you've witnessed female lives.
I understand that, but it's still one step removed from reality. And when I write, I always write about reality and something that relates to me or people I know in a real sense. So it's just an alien world and things happening. Yes, I get the references to parenthood and to motherhood and creation of babies. I understand those, but to me, and it's not. I don't think it's just because I'm male. There's nothing. There's no resonance in me with this story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was too much suspension of disbelief.
That's funny because I didn't even the doll thing didn't even make me pause and be like, oh, I guess I just the way
you read a lot more magical realism though. Gerald's a new convert. He's only just recently in the last couple of months been like, okay, I kind of like it.
Gerald made a comment earlier, well, where did the men go and why is this the process now? And to me, it's that's how it's always been in this universe. There was never a time where anyone ever made babies other than by making dolls. To me, it's just that's just it. That's the universe we're in now, and you're done. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it's the same way. That said, like, I was curious. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Where is this going to go? I read the interview of the author, and one of the questions that the interviewer asked in the New Yorker was it a conscious decision to not include men in the story? Because it's really, there are a lot of stories without men in them, but there's always a sense that they're in the society somewhere. Mm-hmm. And this story, there's no sense that men exist. Mm-hmm. It is essentially like an Amazon culture. And that's interesting. And she literally said, no, they just never came up. She had this idea about dolls being made into children, and men just didn't come up. Now, I'm not saying anything about the boys on our podcast because you guys are some of the most enlightened men I know.
Wow.
But
praise indeed.
I can see how reading a story where the culture is different, it's magical realism, and your gender is literally not even an afterthought, could be very uncomfortable. Like, I feel that way when I read stories where I feel like Black people don't even exist in the world. I'm like, oh, this is awkward, you know? And so I can see how that might give some men pause.
Okay, so let's. I don't feel uncomfortable because there's no men. It's because
But you can't latch onto it because there's nothing there that you can relate to.
Well,
the story is purely female experience.
But it's not. It's not gender based though. That, you know, that my comment very early on about there's no men in it, therefore, you know, it's like there's no cars in it or something. It's not that's the reason, but there is.
I'm gonna push you on that, Gerald, because the story is purely female experience, which is something you haven't experienced, so you can't relate to it. There's no men in it, and there's no women having experiences that you can relate to because all the experiences in the story are purely female experiences. We're talking mother-daughter relationships. We're talking creation of children from a female point of view, female disappointment. Like, this story could not be any more female than it is. Like, even like, you know, even like superhero stories with Wonder Woman in them, Wonder Woman sometimes does stuff that men do.
Yeah, it's right. So let's look at a superhero story that's just women. It's just women superheroes rescuing women in a women's related world. I could get on board with that. I don't have a problem.
They fight each other.
No, I don't have a problem with that.
They sometimes do more than fight each other.
Yeah. Steady. So what I do have a problem with, as Rami said, it's just too hard to stretch between my life, my experiences, my thought processes, and this story and everything going on in the story. It's like over there. It's not just because I'm not female. It's just, you know, having babies by making things out of hair and it's just a little bit too weird for me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for being.
I'm thinking when you made your points, Maya, of just pretending that the story was all male and that the men were making babies this way somehow. Mm-hmm. I don't think I would have liked it anymore.
No, good point. I wouldn't. There would still be that complete disconnect with the story and everything about it.
I just appreciate you both being such good sports about that question. I love our men.
Grammy's thought experiment where he switches it all to men, he says doesn't change his opinion. It changes mine because it makes no sense to me when it's like.
Yeah, because men don't have a different experience. I mean, if it was changed to men, the father-son relationship would have been very different, which would have changed the whole emphasis for why she goes to mother.
Yeah.
She wouldn't be going someplace else to have her child blessed because, frankly, most dads wouldn't be that invested in how pretty their grandchild is going to be. It's like, okay, this is your kid. Here, blessing given. You fucked up, but you'll learn later.
Yeah, and not even that, like, not so much that part, but for me, the part that stops to make sense when it's men, it's the anguish that goes into making the perfect doll and the humiliation and scorn if that doll dies in the year before they become flesh. Like, that to me just seems so female. Maybe it's not, but there's a way in which it's just like so. I think the metaphor of mama taking the humanity from the woman is something that is very acutely a thing that happens to mothers and not men. Like, I feel like when men lose a child, it's extremely sad, and everyone comes around and grieves with them and supports them. But there isn't the same level of scorn and blame and the way that I think women bear it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it different for me.
And even if that blame isn't from the outside, there's an internal blame. Like, I've witnessed couples where they've lost a child and the guy is like, I don't know what to do to help my wife. Like,
yeah,
she's having an experience here that I like, I'm hurting, but she is just, I need my wife back. And I've witnessed that from the outside, how that grief is different, where men are sad and they're crushed and women feel like there's something wrong with them.
Yes, because traditionally they are the creator of the baby, aren't they? They carry the baby, and I can totally see that if something happens to that child before it's born, then there, yes, I'm sure some people feel shame and anger and a whole range of emotions. It's you know, I understand that.
I don't think there's anything harder, like, in the realm of, like, making babies. I honestly think being the partner of a woman that's struggling to have a kid has got to be one of the hardest life experiences for a partner to go through.
Who's struggling,
yeah.
Yeah.
No, even so, it's like, because I've seen it break up couples. I've seen men just completely, like, not know how to help at all, and that feeling of being completely impotent and unable to assist somebody that they love, as the woman is just trashing herself emotionally. And so, yeah, I think that is a very, very difficult place to be. And the fact that the story brings us to these kind of conversations is another reason why I think it's a perfect story.
Really good, yeah. And actually, as you were talking, I was thinking, so I said how if it was all men, I'd find it weird because, one, it's the loss of the baby. While men are supported and people grieve with them, there's not the same amount of blame. And also in the creation and in the going into motherhood, you know, men who do give up things and become fathers and do all of that, it's like, yay, good job, you're a great guy. But there isn't the same thing with women where it's like, but if you don't sacrifice, you are terrible. Like, I feel like men are criticized increasingly, which is a good thing if they don't take on the fatherhood role. But it's always been that for women. It's just supposed to say you're expected to give up your entire being, your entire identity. You are just mother now. Your body belongs to your children. Your life belongs to your children. In a way that still isn't quite true for men. So I feel like that's why if the story was all men, I'd be like, this is odd. And I wouldn't be able to relate to it at all because it'd be like,
it doesn't speak as it's too rooted in the female experience for it to make sense in a male experience.
Yeah.
Like, even at its most basic, I don't see most men saying, well, you know, creating a strong kid that's going to be capable of living in this world is a bad thing. Let's make something pretty and fluffy and made out of yarn. I just don't see that as being a conflict that I would see in a story of all men. I mean, if let's be honest, if men could make children and have them be blessed alive, I think that we'd have a whole planet full of Transformers.
Yeah. And
Is that a sexist remark?
Oh, completely. But it was a funny joke, so do it.
Yeah. And I think even like men who fully embrace fatherhood and like are on all the daddy blogs and like are up to date with everything in the child's life, still externally the expectation is not the same.
Yeah.
And I think that's what changed it for me.
Yep. I agree with you, Anais. Do we want to talk about the language in this story? I'm curious. I mean, the premise is so rooted in magical realism And since both Rami and Gerald had so many difficulties with the story, how did you guys feel about the language of the story?
Yeah, it was okay.
Mm-hmm.
It was, yeah, it was well written. It was it was such that I didn't notice the language in the story. So that's pretty much spot on, really.
Okay, so it didn't prevent you from being able to appreciate the language.
No.
Sometimes a story can be so just out of left field, you can't even get to the language. You're just like, I hate everything about it. I hate the fact it exists. As Rami would say, the story doesn't need to exist.
It doesn't. No, I mean, say something like that is sort of quite a personal comment about the story itself. And I think the story, I'm sure, has merits, and I can't see them. So
yeah,
that's
so diplomatic.
I've had stories like that. Like I totally know that feeling, and I feel that way frequently when I read Hemingway. Because a lot of Hemingway stories are so rooted in the male experience, I can't access them. And I'm like, I know this is a genius story, but I can't see it.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, Man on the Bridge. I reread it. I still can't. I'm like, I don't get it.
Okay.
Even after finding other stories of his that I liked.
Yeah. Okay.
I think for the prose, one of the things that stood out to me is I really just like the voice that's in my head, the cadence and the melody, like the author's voice. I just loved it. It was like a balm. It just washed over me. I just kept reading. I was surprised because it looked long when I opened it on my phone. It's like 3 columns, 7 pages, and it flew right by. I loved it.
It's about 6,500 words, so it's a fairly substantial short story.
Yeah, it is, and that reminds me, when we post it online, we should probably post both the Kane link and the New Yorker link, because the New Yorker link is easier to read. But I would say one of the things that I liked about it was it read like it was written by someone who reads a lot of poetry, but not like flowery poetry, but like modern, inventive poetry. Like there's a rhythm and a flow. There is placement of words where you wouldn't, like metaphors that you wouldn't expect. I felt like the language, if you're a reader who loves to dissect interesting language, you're going to love the story. If you're a reader that hates it when a writer writes in such a way that the language is so flowery that it gets in the way, you're still going to love the story because it doesn't do that. You can read it and have the language just fade into the background, or if you read it closely and you look at the structure, there's going to be something for you there as well.
What matter if one toenail argued with the other?
Like, really? Where are these sentences from? Heaven?
Heaven?
You didn't like that one, Rami? I love that one.
Oh, I loved it too.
Yeah.
Explain it.
Yeah, explain yourself, Whitney.
All right, let me find it real quick. Okay.
Yeah, you have to read like the whole like statement, like in order to get it. These aren't things that honestly, this is why it works, because she will put these strange metaphors in, but it will be surrounded with the things that explain the metaphor. And this is where a lot of writers that want to write really interesting, amazing language lose readers who aren't MFA students, is they will put in metaphors and stuff and then not have anything to back it up, or they'll put in a foreign word and not explain it in context. And then you're just like, what did I just read?
And this, I think, gives plenty of context, because it talks about how she walks in with a new baby and they do the traditional song you're supposed to do, but then she says that the second the words were out, they went back to work as though the song were a sneeze. These are the two co-workers who hate her. But things shift. Because she has a self-satisfied air, she's no longer anxious. The main character, Ogechi, she's like, the power dynamic has shifted. But then Mama comes in. She owns everything. She's a landlord. She's a beauty salon owner. She's a shopkeeper. So she comes in and she picks up on that. So it's when Mama walked in, she paused, sensing the shift in power in the room. But it was nothing to her. She was still the head. What matter if one toenail argued with the other? So that's the body metaphor. She's the head, which we all understand. That's an easy one. It's a colloquial.
And they're doing it at the bottom.
And they're all the way at the bottom. They're not even the hands. They're toenails. They're complete scum to her.
Yeah. And the fact that you read the sentence by itself and you're like, okay, where was that? And then you find where it was and it becomes so obvious.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really skillfully done.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I like really interesting language, but I recognize that you lose a lot of readers that way. And I like this approach.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was great.
Yeah, this story had me at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
There is a sentence at the beginning. Let me pull it up. Like, like even just the description of the baby. Let me just read you the first line. The yarn baby lasted a good month, emitting dry, cotton-soft gurgles and pooping little balls of lint before Ogechi snagged its thigh on a nail and it unraveled as she continued walking, mistaking its little huffs for the beginning of hunger, not the cries of an infant being undone. Like, I love that so much because when I read that at first, I was like, is this a metaphor for something? And then as I'm reading, I'm realizing that it's literally a yarn baby. And it's literally, I mean, what would a yarn baby do? It would hiccup cotton gurgles and it would poop balls of lint. But when you first read it, you don't know that. And it sounds like a really interesting metaphor that's really amazingly written. And it works on so many different levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The part, as you just read it, the new level that it worked on for me was the way that Ogechi didn't know what its cries were for, that like young mother doesn't know, and it's the cries of an infant being undone. She doesn't say unraveling, just undone. Just that word choice is genius. Because if it's unraveling, you're limited to the yarn. But when you say undone, it's anything.
It could be anything.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. I feel like I'm not convinced. Gerald, has your score not even gotten up half a point with all of this illumination?
No, no, because I can appreciate what he's doing, and at the moment I'm struggling just thinking about the score and trying to work out whether I score the good bits of it or whether I score it as a story as a whole. So
I think it's got to be the second. That's how we always do it.
I don't know. Everybody does everything differently on here. Like, he's going to score it when he scores it. One thing that really came to me was the idea of reflection in the language. So in the beginning, she's talking about, you know, this baby is coming undone because she doesn't recognize what the cries are for. And then later on, when she makes this new baby out of hair and she has to figure out what to feed the baby. Again, it's that sense of, I don't really understand. And then when the baby eats the woman and its tummy is warm and she's like recoiling from it and she knows what this baby needs now, it's like this foreshadowing of like, ooh. And another place where it's done perhaps not as artfully, like this is my one criticism of the story, is not necessarily that it's in there, but how it's in there. The allegory of why hair babies are not allowed in this society. Like, I understand why it's in there. I don't necessarily like how it was done in there.
You mean the cautionary tale?
Yeah, the cautionary tale. It was too much on the nose. But I don't know if changing it would affect the dread that came later, because towards the end, I felt like I was reading a Stephen King story. Like, there was a real horror element, and part of that horror element came from knowing the story that is in their culture.
Plus, it's the only way to have her hide the baby, because otherwise she'd be showing off the baby. Like, why? You know, you have to explain why is she hiding it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was great. I loved it. My score can't go any higher, and this discussion makes me love it more and more.
It's interesting. I've got a friend who is watching this podcast and who read the story, who is female and who also loved it. So,
oh my God, we should take a poll.
Should I say ex-friend?
If we take a poll and all the men hated it and all the women loved it, that would be fascinating. Like, that would be really fascinating, because I don't think I've ever read a story that's this rooted in the female experience.
And it would be quite a good story to be able to alienate all men.
Gail says
Gerald, no snark there. I love it when Gerald gets snarky.
What is it?
It's the best, Gerald.
Do you like it? Okay.
I do. It's my favorite version of you.
Wait, real quick, just to, because Gail, who was our guest last week, she's watching the live chat, and I just want to see, Gail, as a woman, did you love this story? I don't know. Maybe you should respond this time. I hope so.
I hope so too. Was there anything else you guys wanted to talk about, especially Gerald and Remy, since you guys really struggled with the story, and I'm sure there's other viewers, listeners who have struggled with the story. Was there anything else that you guys had questions about or wanted to complain about?
Nope. No, I've complained enough, I think.
But you did so artfully, and I think you made some really valid points. Like, one of the questions is that I'm having right now is, do all stories need to be written for all readers? Now, me personally, I have my own ideas on this, but on like a big like whole, we pretty much all agree no. Like, there are people that like mystery, there are people that like literary fiction, whatever. And then you get more granular, it becomes a little trickier. It's like, do all stories need to be accessible to all races? Do all stories need to be accessible to all genders? If you write a story that's purely for Black people, is that a bad thing? If you write a story that's purely for white people, is that a bad thing? Like, you put race in place of gender, it becomes really tricky. And so, like, as a writer, I try to be inclusive in my writing, but I root my stories in a particular experience. I feel like this story is very rooted in a particular experience, but it might not necessarily be for you guys.
Yeah, not all stories have to be written for all people. And so you can say, yes, as a male, don't have a problem. I don't know, because I don't like to say it's a gender thing. The evidence.
I know you don't like to say it, but the evidence.
Well, the evidence is that we're split on gender on this particular story. But and it could be that we, as men, are missing out on the mother-child sort of bond about which this story is. At its heart, so we don't get to that basis. But you make a good point. So if a story excluded and didn't have people of other races, would that be a bad thing? If it was. I don't think it's a bad thing. I can't criticize the story for not engaging me. It's just how it is. So I wouldn't criticize it for not having token men floating around.
But we criticize stories based on race all the time. Now, there's a lot of other issues that come into that. The reason why books are criticized for only having Caucasians in them is because it's harder for books to get published that have diverse characters. Or the books that are published oftentimes lend themselves to stereotypes because that's what the editors will accept. So we do that for race.
Yeah, but I think we're confusing two different things here. Criticism shouldn't necessarily lead to normative rules about anything. So as an author, you can write what you want to write. And I think the impetus on who is presenting diverse fiction needs to come from the publishers and the gatekeepers and the people who have power. But I'm not going to tell any author to write or to not write something. Now, that doesn't shield them from a critique. If there is an author who, for whatever reason, is writing a sci-fi where it doesn't make sense for there not to be Black people in the future, you can still give that critique. And maybe that's something that will help that author grow or not. They can listen to it or not. But I think ultimately the person that we're pressuring to make fiction more diverse isn't authors themselves, because there's plenty of diverse authors who are going to give you what you want. It's the publishers that you're looking at.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. As you say, as writers, we can write what the heck we like, and it's not for someone to say what we should and shouldn't write. But if we take a stance on a particular hot button issue, then we must be prepared to take criticism for that. For that stance, whether whichever way we do, and if someone was to take a stance on a sort of socialist-based political issue, then that's not diverse. But it's if they were to take that stance, that's up to them, and you know, you have to take the criticism accordingly. So in that case, I don't, but I can't blame. I don't know if this author deliberate, from what Maya said about the interview, it sounds like she didn't deliberately exclude men from the story. It's just that men didn't happen to appear in it, which I can totally accept.
I mean, it's one of those things where as a writer, a lot of times people read things into your writing that isn't really there. Painters go through the same thing. You know, you paint one thing and then people stand there and put all these layers of meaning. You're like, I was just painting a tree. And I feel like sometimes that happens a lot in writing. You know, I feel like for this story, the story is very much rooted in the female experience. It's very much rooted in Africa. Like, it is very much a Nigerian story. Like, this idea of creating children out of dolls, it's not a fable there. She created it, but it has the elements and the rhythms of other native fables from that area. You know, it's very rooted in that, in the morals, what's considered important, the way family is seen, feel very Nigerian to me. Having hung out with Nigerians, I'm like, oh, this feels very much like their culture. It's also rooted very much in being female. And I think that's really special. I think sometimes when we look for diverse fiction, like we said at the beginning, like over 2 years ago, when we started this show, we wanted to pick stories from all over the world. As long as they're available in English and as long as you can read them for free, we'll have them on the show. We've struggled sometimes to find diverse stories. And even when we found diverse stories, they were written in a very Western way. So we might go out of our way to find a Japanese story and it's written as if it could have been written in London or the US. This story doesn't feel like it could be written in a Western way. Like, this story feels like it's a diverse story.
Mm-hmm. And shout out to Kane, because we sometimes read stories from the same journals and stuff, and it's mixed reviews. And I feel like their standard for what makes the cut, the 2 stories we've read have been knockouts in my opinion. So it's just like, I know Gerald and Rami disagree right now, but like, I'm just like, it makes me trust Kane more. It's like, oh, I'm just going to go
Well,
there.
yeah, I mean, they're a prize. I mean, you know, they're a contest, but
prizes.
This was the runner-up.
What?
The runner-up.
Who won? Who beat this?
The girl, the
one we read.
birds that
That was
flew.
good.
Yeah, that was the winner. And so
good.
I'm just fascinated with having this new place to go to find really amazing stories from the continent of Africa.
Mm-hmm. There Kane Prize for other regions, because I'm just gonna like I feel like I just trust their standard now, because we've read prize winners in other stories. I'm like, it's good, but why did it win the prize? I didn't get it. And here I'm like, I get it.
Yeah, one of my favorite journalists has done that a couple times, and I won't name them because then Gerald will really hate me this episode.
Would that be Granta by any chance?
No, it wouldn't be Granta.
Oh,
Okay.
That was cute. So, are we ready to rate this story?
Yep.
I'm going to get my 6 out of the way because it's a perfect story to me. Even with that little hiccup about that story within a story, like, frankly, it's a style thing and it needs to be there. And I think it was done as well as it could have been done. So I love this story. I think it's an amazing story. It's going to stick with me. I'm going to reread it and I'm going to recommend it to everybody, including men. I think if you're a man and you like the story, please let us know, because I'm really curious to know if this story really does split on gender lines.
Mm-hmm.
I might actually give this the lowest score I've ever given, purely because
Wow,
because I can't engage with it. I can see the good bits of it, but rating it as a story, it's a 1 from me.
I think that is the lowest he's ever rated anything.
What?
Sorry.
Wow.
Oops.
I'm fascinated. You're horrified. I'm just fascinated.
Rami?
Is Rami going to outdo you with a 0.5?
No, and I was initially going to give it a 1, but like I said, since I'm not feeling well, I'm going to give it a 1.5 because I acknowledge it might be me.
Wow.
Wow. Okay, 6, obviously. What? I don't understand. This is like the most polarized.
Yeah.
I'm
Wow.
just fascinated. Like, if I could sit here for another hour and just pick the boys' heads, I would. Like, the whole, like, the split and the way they absolutely hated it and we absolutely loved it is so interesting to me right now.
I can't even.
I don't think we've ever been this polarized. I find it fascinating. And I think it actually is. I would like to see more stories that split us up, that really are this polarizing. I feel like sometimes the best literature is a literature that either you love it or you hate it. You're going to go one way or the other. There's no way to feel lukewarm about it. And I feel like this story totally achieves that. So we are going to do a quiz on dolls.
Okay, that's a creepy.
as is. It's multiple choice, and then each of you gets one question, and then there's a tiebreaker. Okay.
Right. Submissions.
So what are you guys submitting for next week?
I shall go again with "And of Clay We Are Created" by Isabel Allende.
Okay. I'm doing "The Drowned Giant" by J.G. Ballard for Todd.
And my story is "William and Mary" by Roald Dahl.
You know what? I've never read a Roald Dahl story. I've watched some movies made from his stories, but I've never read one of his stories, and I had no idea Isabella Allende wrote short stories.
I was going to say, actually, we did "Man from the South." Maybe you weren't on that episode.
Maybe I wasn't. Yeah, I'm totally fascinated. So, Gerald.
Yep.
The Akuba doll is from Ghana and nearby areas. This doll has a huge disc-like head. I'm going to give you 3 options. This doll is A, used to curse people, B, used to help fertility, C, used for play by small children.
Huge disc-shaped head. I would say it would be used for fertility.
Ding, 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 ding. Gerald was right.
Yeah, I know my dolls. Maybe.
Okay. Anais, some dolls have eyes that close when they're laid down. When did the first doll with sleeping eyes appear? 1863, 1914, 1943.
1863?
Nope, 1914. So, Rami, the Lingo Koba dolls are colorful dolls from the small Nabeli tribe in southern Africa. Which statement is true? First option, during courtship, a boy will put the doll outside a girl's home when he is ready to propose marriage. 2, this doll is created during pregnancy and given to the child when they marry. 3, this doll is made and dressed by the girl's grandmother.
The first option.
Okay, Gerald and Rami are tied. This is great. Okay, here is the tiebreaker. And Anais, if you want to guess, you can, but I'm only going to be rating in between Gerald and Rami. The oldest doll designed for play was recently found in the grave of a small child. The toy is how old?
1,000 years old.
Yeah, I would go more. I'd say 2,000 years old.
4,500 years old. Oh, sorry.
It's fine. You're not grading me anyway. I was going to guess over 6,000, so I'm the other. Too far.
Yeah, 4,500 years old. It was also found with the head of like a little dragon thing, and only the head of the doll survived, and they think that it probably had a body made of like straw or something. Yeah, it was. I think it was found last year. It's pretty fascinating. So, who was closest? Gerald was closest. Gerald, what are we reading next week?
Next week we shall be reading "And of Clay We Are Created" by Isabel Allende.
But before you go, tell us what your baby doll is made of at literaryroadhouse.com. Our doll is made of tweets. Send us a traditional song to turn our tweets into something living at Lit Roadhouse. Want even more diverse fiction? Join the Literary Roadhouse Book Club, a monthly show that discusses full fiction novels. Also, we need to buy expensive shampoo and real wigs to groom and feed our, look, that's not important. Support our secret hair baby and podcast at patreon.com/Literary Roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with a landlord who literally sucks the joy out of your life. Until next time, read a good story.
Every time I think you can't get